For the first time in decades, a state's National Guard has been deployed by the federal government without direct permission from that state. President Trump has ordered the deployment of National Guard troops in California to protect and assist ICE agents carrying out his immigration crackdown. The deployment's legality is under heavy scrutiny, with legal challenges expected to come thick and fast. Today, we break down how the president took control of the National Guard, the legal issues surrounding it, and what might happen next. Welcome to the Politics of New America. I'm your host, Nathan Stone, and welcome to a special Tuesday edition of the Weekly Brief. I felt this topic couldn't wait until Friday, so let's start by examining the president's memorandum that kicked off all this chaos. To begin, what is a presidential memorandum? It's a little bit like an executive order. It's a directive issued by the President of the United States to manage the actions, practices, and policies of various federal departments and agencies that are found under the executive branch. It does have the force of law and is usually used to delegate tasks, and this one is, as we'll see. And it also can be used to direct specific government agencies to do a thing or to start a process. Now, it's not quite as prestigious as an executive order is. We know Trump loves executive orders, and it's important to kind of know that an executive order is more important. It takes precedent over a memorandum like this. But they're all tools of the trade, basically. Now, what is in this memorandum? Well, it's a doozy. The title is Department of Defense Security for the Protection of Department of Homeland Security Functions. What this means is we're deploying military assets to protect Homeland Security assets, so ICE enforcement, when they are rounding people up. It starts off by making a sales pitch, this memorandum. Numerous incidents of violence and disorder occurring, immigration and customs enforcement, ICE under threat. It mentions violent protests that threaten the security of and significant damage to federal immigration detention facilities and other federal property. So the memoranda makes the case that things are getting out of control. There's protests, there's riots, ICE agents don't feel safe, and because of this, further drastic action is required. Now, what's important is the last sentence of the first paragraph of this memorandum. To the extent that protests or acts of violence directly inhibit the execution of laws, they constitute a form of rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. This is the argument with which Trump is bringing in the National Guard. And we'll get to that. He's doing it under what's known as Title 10. And that is addressed in the second paragraph of this memorandum. I hereby call into federal service members and units of the National Guard under Title 10 of the U.S. Code to temporarily protect ICE and other United States government personnel who are performing federal functions, including the enforcement of federal law, and to protect federal property at locations where protests against these functions are occurring or are likely to occur. So what this means is he is invoking Title 10 powers, and Title 10 revolves around how the president can take federal control of the National Guard and deploy them on a domestic basis. So we'll cover that in just a second, but we should get through some other important aspects of this memorandum. A little further into this second big paragraph of the memorandum, we get this. The members and units of the National Guard called into federal service shall be at least 2,000 Guard personnel, and the duration of duty shall be for 60 days or at the discretion of the Secretary of Defense. In addition, the Secretary of Defense may employ any other members of the regular armed forces as necessary to augment and support the protection of federal functions and property in any number determined appropriate in his discretion. So what this means is we're going to see at least 2,000 National Guard personnel, but that could be the minimum. There is no limit placed on this. So if needs must, we could see more call-ups. Again, 60 days or at the discretion of the Secretary of Defense. So Hegseth has a lot of leeway here to expand this operation should he deem it necessary. Finally, in the last paragraph here, to carry out this mission, the deployed military personnel may perform those military protective activities that the Secretary of Defense determines are reasonably necessary to ensure the protection and safety of federal personnel and property. The Secretary of Defense shall consult with the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security prior to withdrawing any personnel from any location where they are sent. This one, again, is kind of a freedom of action, right? Protective activities that the Secretary of Defense determines are reasonably necessary to ensure the protection of federal personnel and property. That is a very wide open book. This whole memorandum is 3 slightly overly long paragraphs that have had an incredible effect on the country in a matter of hours. But the important part to remember is all of this stems from the president's use of Title 10. What is Title 10? Well, it governs the National Guard, how they can be deployed and used by the president. So there are 3 options that the president has. 1, if the United States or any commonwealths or possessions is invaded or in danger of invasion by a foreign nation. This one's right out of the table. There is no foreign nation invading the United States or any of its territories. So we're looking at Section 2 and 3 here. There is rebellion or danger of rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. That is Clause 2. And if we go back to our very first paragraph, this is what the Trump administration and Trump himself is claiming, right? It constitutes a form of rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. They basically put it word for word in the memoranda. But they also claim Clause 3 here. The president is unable, with regular forces, to execute the laws of the United States. So this is when they say that they're impeding ICE immigration enforcement efforts. They're claiming both Clause 2 and 3 here of Title 10. However, it's very important to notice that this is all going to be challenged in court. And when it is challenged in court, this little part of Title 10 may come up because it is kind of important. So right after those 3 clauses, this is what it says. The president may call into federal service members and units of the National Guard of any state in such numbers as he considers necessary to repel the invasion, suppress rebellion, or execute those laws. Now here's the important bit. Orders for these purposes shall be issued through the governors of the states. That one line is so important because Governor Newsom in California never requested this deployment, right? It's the first time since the 60s that the president has federalized, which is what it's called when the federal government takes command of these National Guard units that are organized by the state generally and under the command of those states' governors. So the president is doing something that hasn't happened since the 60s and generally can only happen if those states ask for help. And it should be noted that Newsom did, in fact, ask for federal help during the George Floyd protests in 2020. Now, there are 2 important laws that stop the National Guard or the Army or any military service from getting involved in civilian law enforcement. There is a section of Title 10, right? So the rules around deploying the National Guard that says you cannot do this. You cannot deploy them as a police force. And that is U.S. Code Title 10, Subtitle A, Part 1, Chapter 15, Subsection 275. And it reads, "The Secretary of Defense shall prescribe such regulations as may be necessary to ensure that any activity, including the provision of any equipment or facility or the assignment detail of any personnel, under this chapter does not include or permit direct participation by a member of the Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marine Corps in a search, seizure, arrest, or other similar activity unless participation in such activity by such member is otherwise authorized by law." It means you can't have the military playing police. And not only that, it's also forbidden under the Posse Comitatus Act. Now, if you've listened to some of our older episodes, we actually did one all about the Posse Comitatus Act. But at its heart, it is a blanket ban on using the military to, well, act as law enforcement, act as cops, assist the police, designed to keep them off of the American streets as much as possible. So it's important to note that these protests in LA have not reached the size or scope of past demonstrations that brought in the National Guard, right? Because LA has actually had the National Guard called in a few times. The Watts riots in 1965, those were motivated by anger over racist and abusive policies of the LAPD, as well as societal issues, employment discrimination, segregation, and poverty. The Rodney King riots in 1992, very famously after Mr. King was beaten viciously on camera by members of the LAPD. And then, as I mentioned, the 2020 protests, which is, again, it's police violence. So the LAPD is really, really good at getting people really, really angry at them. And in that one, Newsom actually requested the assistance of federal troops. So all of those were bigger than what we were seeing now. And Newsom has argued that they have or had everything in hand and that these federal troops are just going to exacerbate the problem and make things worse. As a fun fact, as much as any of this could be called fun, the last time the National Guard was activated without a governor's permission was in '65, when Lyndon B. Johnson sent troops to protect a civil rights march and organizers in Alabama. That was the last time. It's been a long, long time. So where do we go from here? Well, like I said, we're going to get quick litigation. The administration might face some kind of injunction barring the deployment. If that's the case, expect this to rocket up the courts until it gets to the Supreme Court in pretty short order. If this escalates, so if the violence gets worse, which it very well could, many predict that the administration wants that to happen because they want to be able to enact the Insurrection Act of 1807. This is one you might have seen several times on the news, people talking about this and all the nastiness around it. But it's the best tool that the government has to suspend the Posse Comitatus Act. And if it is enacted, the administration could bring the military in to support domestic policing. That, for a lot of people, is a worst-case scenario. And for good reason, historically, using the military to police civilian ends in tragedy and causes further violence. It's just not a good idea. So if such a thing were to happen, there would be immediate and aggressive legal challenges to it. And this is a ongoing and quickly developing story, so I'm going to keep following it. And if there's more kind of policy things to clear up, I might do more kind of daily or weekly briefs on those issues. But I hope that this one has given you just a quick overview of how the president is able to do this, what those legal challenges might look like to this deployment, and kind of where we might end up with this. This is one you're going to really want to follow. I think everyone in the country should be following this story because it kind of cuts to the heart of the law and order policies of the Trump administration. And we might see just how far they're willing to go to enact their plans here. That's going to do it for this one. More as events warrant, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, give us a 5-star rating on your podcast platform of choice, and tell all your friends. The Politics of New America is hosted by Nathan Stone and produced by Josh Carmody. You can follow us on Blue Sky at Politics New America.
This has been a Haunted Mouse production. Cut that out.